And we're recording. Cool. So welcome back, guys. Welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, what's up, guys? Looking forward to this topic of today. Looks like we're gonna get a little personal today, right?
Yeah. So what we're talking about today is kind of Eli's background, what he's experienced, and what makes him, I guess, qualified to talk about mental illness and kind of lead this conversation. Which I don't think either of us are really qualified to. You're more qualified than I am, but I don't think either of us are really qualified to talk about it. I think it's more of our experiences could help people.
Yeah,
I guess is a good way of putting it. So we're going to dive into his backstory, kind of what makes him him, and how he's dealt with mental illness, kind of growing up, and how he's dealing with it now. So before we do that, I do want to mention that Spero Cloth is going to be available soon. Um, we're in the beginning stages of revamping the website, getting everything prepared to launch sometime next year, the beginning of the
yeah,
year before spring hits. But we're going to do it right and do it big. So just wanted to
yeah,
mention that before we get started. So um,
dude,
I guess
excited for
it's going to be fun. And we're going to have some merch for the podcast included in that too, because it is a collaboration. We're going to have some um, that have the collab logo and all of that, and then we're going to have some actual Spero specific brands and designs. So it's going to be real exciting. We're going to have more information on that as it comes closer and as we get the website going and all of that. Um, but let's dive into this topic and dive into your background and what makes you you.
that. Yeah, for sure. And if you have any questions or want me to dive into something a little bit further, just let me know. I'm pretty much just gonna go over the gist of basically. I want to use my story as an example of how life experiences, your childhood, everything can really influence pretty much your mental health and pretty much what I experienced as far as anxiety and depression.
Okay.
So I guess essentially, I as I was studying and I actually took childhood development. I actually was learning so much about myself through that whole experience, gaining knowledge on the topic, and I had briefly touched base with it in our last podcast that basically the way that we're raised is a way that we'll develop attachments or a way that we'll develop a certain type of anxiety. And I had told you guys about my childhood video where I was freaking out when my mom walked away to go go on some go-karts whatever, and I was freaking out until she came back. So like with that piece of, I guess, a little bit of evidence from my childhood, it kind of shows that um, from the beginning I always had kind of like a separation anxiety. And it was interesting because yesterday I was doing a little bit more research, and they say that people that have either like an anxious attachment or separation anxiety, I was looking this up with Craig Kenneth, and he was doing some research with his fellow superior. Her first name was Margaret. I can't remember her last name, but she's been in the psychology field for well over 35 years, and she's got her MD. And she basically was saying that this all is passed down through generations, and more than likely, it's at least two or three generations deep that these anxieties will manifest within a family. So when I was looking back, I noticed that my family history had a lot of relationship issues and a lot of connection issues. So like me with my mom, we're super close, but that was because my mom worked really hard at it. Because her relationship with my grandma was actually pretty rocky because of their upbringing, and I guess you can kind of say that on my mother's side, a lot of my extended family we aren't close. Like the most family that I'm really close with is my uncles and then my cousins, and that's it. But I just found out that I actually have family in Puerto Rico that I have never met, or they haven't seen me since I was a baby. So technically, I never really knew them. So it just kind of shows that that theory is actually rather accurate. So throughout my childhood, it's always been kind of like a rocky. I guess you would say, kind of like a display of kind of unstable relationships because I was like 2 years old. Um, my parents divorced, and like for most people, like they would think that okay, well that's normal, but a lot of people don't realize that, especially around the ages between 1 to 3 years old, kids develop a huge influence on attachments. So like that's whether with his family, friends, his social life, anything. We basically absorb that through our parents. So we learn how to interact and how to connect with people. And what's interesting is I was actually had talked to my therapist, and the fact that I could remember the day that my parents got divorced, she explained to me as that was a very traumatic and impactful moment in my life to the point where it has carried with me throughout my entire life. So
Hmm.
a lot of people, whether your parents or whether you're around kids or something like that, is going to be something to keep in mind because you may think that they're not very aware, but in their subconscious, they will keep that. And even though they
Yeah.
may not be able to communicate it, they will carry that with them throughout their whole lives. So it's very crucial, especially in the beginning stages, that you display healthy connections, healthy communication, uh, proper affection with your significant other, because when they're observing, they're soaking that in, and they're like, for instance, like you have your daughter. So like when you and Tristan are interacting, they're looking at that and they're gonna be like, okay, so this is how a man should interact with me. This is how they should talk to me.
Yeah.
How they should show affection, and this is how I should respond. And that's essentially how we continue to grow and be social. So going back to my backstory, um, that was a little bit of a struggle for me because, to be honest, and I'm probably gonna have to talk to my mom about this later to give her a forewarning. But I'm pretty much gonna be very open about this because I don't want to like be wishy washy or anything like that. Because I want people to know that these struggles are real and
Yeah.
families aren't perfect, but it's what you do in those moments to grow as a person that will help you get past these things. So for me, I grew up seeing my parents fight all the time. Like they're fighting about me sleeping over my dad's house. Like my
Hmm.
dad just like not being very much of a good role model at the time. Um, and like just seeing both my parents jump from one relationship to the next. I mean, my mom ended up marrying another guy that wasn't very healthy, very emotionally unavailable, which kind of put an impression on me that there really aren't too many good men out there. So like it built a distrust in me for other men. And then of course my dad not really being around too much, that further alienated um, me from a connection with other guys. So like uh, and I didn't even realize it until my therapist actually really talked to me about it because when I had was explaining to her that most of my friends are girls, she was like, okay, and then how's your relationship with your mom? And my relationship with my mom was actually really close, but it was kind of like an indifference close. So I'd be very trusting with my mom and all that, but then there's also some things where I'd be like, I think I'm gonna hold on to this, and like it takes a lot for me to like tell my mom everything, and that is what my therapist described as a basically like a disorganized connection because I would want to latch on to my mom, but then I'd still be upset like if something happened and still not want to open up to her. So it was a combination of seeing my dad be that way and then a combination of seeing my mom be attached to me. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so then as I got older, throughout my elementary school and high school years, I really didn't make a whole lot of friends. And I think that was due to me seeing my parents consistently fight all the time. And then, like, through my mom's experience of having to deal with things herself, she really didn't like people helping her because it felt awkward to her. Like, she wasn't used to that because obviously all the other men um, disappointed her, and let her down. So she wasn't expecting any help. So I actually ended up reflecting the same behavior. So like if anybody was nice to me or if anybody would try to help me, I would kind of be like, okay, well, what do you want? Or like, what's going on? And that continued to build up throughout my childhood until it got to the point where I ended up experiencing the most, like, I guess you would say, rock bottom, the most pivotal. I like to call it my pivotal moment because I wanted to change the perspective on it. Because before I used to say that it was a living hell for me, but now I see it as like my biggest pivotal moment that's helped me gain awareness about myself. So pretty much as soon as I became a teenager is when I started experiencing a form of depression, and it was probably around 14 years old because I don't. It was pretty much like I started really being aware of what actually was going on. Like when I was a kid, I used to think that my dad was awesome, and I used to really look up to him, and to the point where I used to cry coming back home to my mom's house. Because the sad part was that during the time my mom being married to her second husband, I was really hating coming home because they were fighting all the time. So I just wanted some peace, and my dad not really being with anybody. I really didn't see too much fighting. So like to me, that was a peaceful place. So when I would come home, all I do was cry. So then, as I became a teenager and I started realizing the reasons why my parents divorced, it really shattered my image of my dad at that time. So, like, I didn't talk to him for like 3 or 4 years after that.
Hmm.
Um, because like I'm not gonna go into extreme details, and I'll keep respect for some
Yeah,
of
for
his
sure.
personal. But it's just like it really did distort my image of him for a while, and it goes to show the impact that parents will have on you, regardless of whether it was an action towards you or indirectly towards somebody else. So that was like the beginning of like me seeing like not the world isn't as cracked up as it seems to be, and because of that, I started questioning, who I was, because part of my studies with childhood development is that the father figure actually plays a major role in self identity, and there's actually a study that's going on that I was talking with my professor back when I was in college that a lot of the misidentities are going on now, and I use misidentities lightly because the whole LGBTQ movement, it's I like to support and I like the equality, and I like to show that everybody should be loved and be who they are. But the only thing that has been an issue, especially with the transgender community, is that the
The
rate of
age.
the age as well, and then as well as that the suicide rate. So initially,
Yeah.
the whole purpose of bringing the LGBTQ community together was to help eliminate that. But in actuality, it's actually been stable, if not steadily increasing, with this suicide rate, which kind of my professor wanted to explain further as it's not basically an issue of acceptance; it's an issue of self-identity.
Okay.
And I personally have ran into people that have went forward with the transgender operations and later on have completely regretted it. And they're like, man, it's more or less I still don't feel like myself. And then most of the time when you talk to that person and you ask them like, so how was your childhood and all that, then all of a sudden that's when the problem comes up. And that's when they're like, oh well, one parent wasn't around or one parent neglected me or they experienced some type of trauma, and back
Hmm.
then they used to call it gender dysphoria, which is actually a condition where somebody feels like an out of body experience, like they don't feel like themselves, and
Yeah.
that's what really leads people to commit
Well,
suicide. Because
they've
go
changed a lot of the like philosophy or whatever. There's I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there's an official an official thing about gender or dysphoria or gender identity that they've changed now to make it so that that's not. I can't remember what the name of it is. They've changed something that has made it that that's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is when they were talking about that, they kind of came up with evidence that children experience different type of hormonal exposure while they're still in the womb and stuff.
That I'm talking about something else. I can't remember what the name of it is, but I'll look into it and I'll bring it up in the next episode.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, this is why like I really encourage pretty much professional help for mental health, because all for years, science will go back and forth on like, oh well, this and that and all that, blah blah blah. But the thing is, whether the person, if they feel like the opposite sex, there's still a lot of mental cues that they have to work through, because you got to think of it this way. You were grown up and treated as one gender, and then all of a sudden you want to switch to a different gender. So you're learning a whole new different way of a social life, and basically a whole new personality per se. So like you'd have to like think about like that will really trigger a lot of mental issues, because then it creates so much conflict, because as kids, like for me, an example, like I obviously, I'm a straight guy, so I was raised how to be a man, you know, and to if I were to end up transitioning, I wouldn't know how to act like a woman at all. Like and like even though like it may say like
Well, and I think that I think that's where us being straight males can't
Mhm.
understand that, because we don't feel like
Yeah,
women.
bro.
You
Yeah.
know, so you wouldn't know how to, because you don't feel that way.
Well, I
And
guess.
that's where
Yeah.
I don't really know. I don't take a stance because I don't know all the information. I know that what I was taught growing up is that that's wrong, but
Oh yeah,
outside of
both of us.
religion
Yeah,
outside of religion I don't want to tell someone what they can and can't do.
exactly.
um, I don't understand it for myself, so I'm not going to have an opinion on what this person's doing because they feel like that's what's best for them.
Yeah,
I
no, I
do,
guess.
however, I do, however, agree with what you're saying. You're kind of talking more of the mental health aspect of it versus the
Yeah,
personal aspect of it.
yeah,
And I think that
exactly.
that's clear to define, because people will hear that and think that we're taking a stance against transgenderism when we're not. We're
Yeah, no,
talking about
exactly.
the mental health aspect of it, where there's stuff in your life that make you feel a certain way that will lead you down that road to ultimately feeling like that you, and you have to be careful how you say it because you don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah, no, but I mean, that's the thing, is just that like, of course, you want to be careful about addressing this topic, but it is something that needs to be addressed, because, like I said, the suicide rate is still like completely unaffected, and
Yeah.
that's my issue.
And
It's
I
like
think
if
that's
you
part of the problem, is that there's no
exactly,
conversation about it. They kind of brush it off like, oh, this is normal. This is what people, this is this is what everyone should be feeling.
yeah,
And
exactly,
they don't get down to the root issue of why it's what they're feeling.
exactly,
And that's why they have higher rates of suicide and more, even when they transgender, they still have that body dysmorphia and gender dysmorphia, and not really knowing what their identity is. So
exactly.
I agree with what you're saying, but I wanted to clarify that we're not talking about anyone's personal opinion to do what they're doing. We're talking about the actual biological chemistry of what's happening, and your nature, nurture, upbringing, and what leads you to that point. So
Exactly. So essentially, yeah, it's just to basically your well being, and to basically tie this in and why I addressed it is that when I was experiencing depression, the same way that a lot of things weren't addressed as far as like with transgender, a lot of things weren't really addressed as far as like people that are depressed. So like as I was a teenager, I was experiencing all these unstable emotions and thought processes, and I didn't know what was going on because there really isn't too much exposure. So you got to think of it this way. Like I'm going through high school. I don't have too many friends. Haven't really seen too much of a healthy relationship. So I don't
mm-hmm.
really have too much of a role model. Thankfully, my mom did her best, and she showed me like what a real man should be like, and supporting and being sensitive to the needs of your significant other, but I never really had a man to show me that. And like I always and like that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand, and I figured that out later in life is that somebody can tell you how a man should be, but it's a total different experience when they can show you. So like my mom did her best, she really did, but there's also, like you said, being a guy, you'll never know. Or like, let's flip it. So like my mom being a woman, she'll never really know what it is to be a man completely because she's not a man, right?
Yeah.
So that was where my disconnect was. So as I was getting older, my depression got stronger because I felt like obviously I'm growing closer to becoming a man, but I feel like I still had no direction. So I went through my own little identity crisis where I was like, okay, I'm becoming a man, but what the hell do I do? So, so I was just like, going through everything, and like back then, that's when like my relationship with God really strengthened because I really tried to find some sort of a role model. So I really focused on my relationship with God, and I know
And
you remember me
I
from back then being like crazy into church and all that.
yeah. And I want to clarify something too. When you talk about being a man, you're not talking about going out and shooting deer or eating meat or doing anything that like quote unquote men do. You're talking about like a true male role model, like someone who shows
Yeah,
you how the right way to act is. And it is different with having a male role model versus a female role model because
yeah,
there's so many biological and chemistry aspects to it that almost even a primitive thing where the testosterone that you have as a man and being around other men that have that but seeing how they act even though they have different things with them, it is very different. And
yeah, yeah,
you're
exactly.
I just wanted to clarify that that's what you're talking about, not going out and quote unquote being a man, but
Yeah,
knowing how to grow up as a man.
yeah, exactly. And like that's exactly where I was like lacking because um and even throughout like my younger years, that's why a lot of my relationships failed because I didn't know how to be the man in the relationship. And like to clarify, it's not like, oh, you gotta be the man, like you gotta have full control or wear the pants or anything. It's just being able to be strong and be a strong foundation in the relationship, but also still be sensitive to your partner. And like that's a concept that I had no idea even existed at the time. So between trying to figure out who I was and not really having too much of a role model, and then take into effect the typical heartbreak from a breakup in a failed relationship, that's where I continued to spiral down. So then
Yeah.
it takes me to about the time that I was graduating out of high school and I was heading to college, and I had experienced a really bad breakup, and then that's when it really set in for me because I ended up going out of state to Indiana first semester to go to college, and when I was out there, I realized how alone I felt, and that is a trigger for severe depression. And
Yeah.
the way that I coped with it, and note that I say cope with it, and I didn't say I overcame it because depression is a consistent thing that comes and goes, and it's a continuous battle. Um, so while I was out there, I really focused on things that really helped me to basically self-soothe. And this is still a concept that I'm still learning, even still to this day, because in order to be efficient at maintaining some mental stability through depression is you have to be able to self-soothe. You cannot rely on other people because
Mm-hmm.
as humans we will always fail at one point or another, and not everybody's going to understand what you're going through, and it's very crucial that you're able to self-soothe. Of course, get professional help if you're at this point where you feel like you really can't get through it. A lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but there are a few people where no matter what you do externally, there is that chemical imbalance that will keep depression at a constant pressure on you. And that's when, medication may be an option. But as far as like, I know you've touched base about like diet and stuff. So like, those are huge things to look into. And I've been a huge I guess, support for natural remedies. So once I started feeling depressed in college, I started working out, and that began my fitness journey. I was like, I had just turned 18. So I started working out. I started watching what I was eating. I avoided the freshman 15. I'm pretty proud of that. and and that's when I started to realize that self care was extremely crucial for my mental health and my happiness. And that's when I actually ended up meeting, well, not really meeting Justin, my best friend, but we actually got close because he knew all the things that I was dealing with back then, and he always used to wonder why or how I would avoid parties and all this stuff. And the reason being that I avoided a lot of parties and all like that is because those were just distractions. You know, I realized at a young age, besides, you know, being part of the church and all that, and then them saying like, oh, you know, partying can lead to some bad things. I also realized that like I really needed time to like reflect off of myself and to figure out how I could improve my mental health and how I could actually heal. And this is actually the time that I took my very first psychology class, and they were talking about awareness, self awareness, and outside influences. So when I was taking that into consideration, I didn't want to be going to parties because then, you know, you look around and yeah, people are having fun, having a good time, but then nobody's really looking at the issues that they're having. They're usually just trying to mask it. So I took it upon myself at that time to really, I guess you can say I isolated myself, but in a healthy manner, because I just preferred to avoid any external influences because I really wanted to search within myself. And
Yeah.
being out, yeah, and being out in campus, I didn't have any of my family close by, so it's not like I had people in my ear telling me what to do or anything. This was like a true pivotal moment in my life that I took control of how I would handle a situation and what I would do with myself. So going forward from there is when I realized that I really need to take my own self care serious. And then that's when I decided to change up my major because it just triggered a passion within me to look further into the mind and look further into helping others. So that's when I actually ended up switching to my psychology major and I came back to Chicago. And then that's when I ended up going to Trinity Christian College, and that's where the childhood development studies started to really flow into my life. And essentially, that's when I learned so much about myself. So starting from Trinity Christian College onward is when the knowledge really hit the road, and I really started to apply within my own life. And it was during that period where the both it was a gift and a cursing and a blessing because I was learning so much about myself through these classes. Like I touched about earlier with childhood development and seeing all these influences within my family, that I started to see all the issues that I needed to work on within myself. And one major thing being how to connect in a relationship because essentially all all I really saw was like, to be honest, my dad, you know, hopping from chick to chick. um, and you know, it was very conflicting because when you got parents separated, 9 times out of 10 they're gonna conflict on ways of raising their kids. So like my dad was the type, you know, no love without the glove, you know. And
Mhm.
then my mom was the type where she was like, you know, value a woman and wait till you're married. So I had both pressures on me because at one point, my own dad even questioned if I was gay or not because I wouldn't talk to him about my relationships and I wouldn't tell him if I was like having sex or whatever. So that was like such a huge conflict within me because I was like, man, you know, like does it mean being a man requires me to like sleep with girls and all this stuff? And then you know I had my mom saying no, don't be like your dad and all this stuff. So like all these things were still a continuous conflict within me, even as I was going through college. So that's when I really just buckled down and really started to focus on my psychology and development classes to truly understand how character and personality is developed. And as I continuously went through my courses, is when I actually ended up in West Virginia, where you're at now, uh, through the opportunity of an internship. And you can say this is being in West Virginia was like a bittersweet time. Like I made so many great friendships, of course with you, Brendan, and then with all the other guys. And I actually, I guess I'll go ahead and share this part because this really was like a huge turning point for me. Because I was in a relationship. I won't mention the name out of respect, but I was in a relationship for about 3.5 years out there, and that relationship really opened my eyes to really how to grow within a relationship, because that tested my character to the absolute max. Between hopping from house to house and couch surfing, I ended up seeing how I can grow and be strong. And being in that relationship with my ex at the time, uh, it really showed me that a man really needs to be strong in the relationship. And I do believe that since I was so unstable, that it really affected our relationship because I was focusing so much on myself, that I wasn't really paying attention to the relationship. And my
Well, and
advice,
I'll say too, because I was there when that relationship was going on, and I'll say both of you had your faults.
yeah,
It's never one person. It's never one sided. Um, I think both of you are different people now, and I wouldn't know you if it hadn't been for this person. So that's something that came out of it that is a good thing because we wouldn't be doing this now. But I think both of you had your faults, and I think both of you are grown from that relationship after it ended. Um, so I do want to say that because you're kind of putting all the blame on you, and while that's fair to do because you don't want to blame her, I think both of you had your faults in the relationship, and I think like even so, my wife was friends with this person, and you and her being in a relationship caused her and her relationship to end. And that wasn't directly the cause, but it did affect other people. Um,
yeah,
and I say that not to say anything bad about you. I'm just bringing up something people don't think about when they're dealing with these things is that it does affect more than just the immediate people that are in the circumstance.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And it was
and
like, and yeah, it's in that whole situation, exactly like you had said, it's just like there's so many things that an internal conflict can affect an external. So like example, like my parents, their internal conflict with their relationship caused an external conflict within,
with you,
yeah,
yeah,
within me. So essentially, with all that happening, I experienced a lot of depression because I felt separation anxiety from my family. I felt separation anxiety from the person who offered me the internship, and that not ending so well. And I just felt all this anxiety throughout this whole time. And I wasn't really acknowledging at the time because what a lot of people have to understand is if you're going through something or you're going through like depression or anxiety, there will be a lot of times where you're so engulfed in the issues that are going on that you don't even understand that you're actually going through anxiety or depression, and like your awareness drops drastically because you're blinded so much by the situation, and it's very hard to be able to pull yourself through it in that moment. Or pretty much my experience was that that's when I hit rock bottom. That's when I hit my lowest point, to where I was struggling with self harm. I had thoughts of ending my life. All these things that are very, very much real. And now that I'm older and I've been able to, been able to get through that, is when I realized man, it would have been so much better, and I would have had so much bit more help if I actually spoke out and if I actually um, had more knowledge or had more information exposed to me on it. And this is why I want to do this podcast, because I know that there are people out there that are going through some things and they feel like they're alone, or they feel like they don't know what to do. And sometimes, you really aren't, you really don't have the tools to gain any knowledge or any awareness on it. And I want to try to bring this into the light so that whether you're a kid or you're a teenager, whatever the case may be, that there's awareness on it, because this whole sweep it under the rug mentality, or like, because uh I just noticed that like most of like any type of exposure to like mental health or anything is very brief. Have you ever noticed that, like ads or commercials or anything like that? They'll do a ton of commercials on like helping dogs or helping the homeless or veterans or anything like that. But how often do you hear about any type of mental health or therapy?
Well, the only stuff that I ever see, because I don't have cable, but the only stuff that I ever see are things on Facebook that people post of memes that are like a passive aggressive, uh, humorous way of saying, "Hey, this is something that I deal with every day, but it's funny because you deal with it too." And I
Yeah,
think I think that's how most people cope with it, is by posting memes on Facebook. And while that's not a terrible way to deal with it, it's not helping the actual issue. So I think
yeah,
having sources like this that people can come and listen to what others have experienced and how they cope with it, um, will help people understand that they're not alone, that they have a purpose, that their life means something, that
mm,
just because they're dealing with this thing right now doesn't mean they're always going to deal with it forever.
yeah. And that's exactly why I wanted to do this to begin with, because that's exactly right. Like when people are putting out memes, it's just like a passive aggressive, but this really needs to be a main focus. Like this really needs to be brought to the light and have value placed in it, because you know there it's continuous, where the suicide rate has not changed. And like what bothers me is that from my personal experience, that's all I ever saw was just memes. And then if I try to talk to anybody, how many times that I got people tell me like, "Oh, just get over it," or "Oh, you'll be fine," whatever. But they didn't realize the severity of the issue. And you know, I hate, absolutely hate when I see like, high school movies or whatever, where you see that kid that is depressed or whatever, and then you see like people bullying that kid. And essentially sometimes you get the message from the movie like, "Oh, don't do that," but for others they take it as a joke, and it's really not. So many times that I've met kids doing like volunteer work or something, and I'm with the group, and uh for some reason a lot of these kids will come up to me and feel comfortable with me. And I've later on realized that the reason why they're comfortable with me and they'll actually open up to me is because I'm very sensitive to that. So like I over the time of my experience and my studies, um, I've actually been able to see the red flags. So like if you see somebody that's like withdrawn, essentially I look for people that look like the way I did when I was younger. People that don't have
Yeah.
too many friends, people that are pretty closed off, or pretty shy and like stay in their corner. Those are the people that are usually having so much going on mentally that they don't even have the capacity to socialize. So then those are the people that I usually end up connecting with the most. And then later on, I find out that they're experiencing something super traumatic at home, or they're really dealing with something that's really bringing them down and immobilizing them from growing and being themselves. And that's the issue that I want to address. So going on with my a little bit of my backstory, it's like while I was going through all this in West Virginia, is when I hit my lowest point, and that's like I said earlier, I was dealing with self harm. I had thoughts of suicide, like severe thoughts. Um, and then it just like it just clicked for me that there's always a reason to live, and my reason was my family, because at the root of everything for me was that I have a family that loves me. And I hate to hear those people that that can't say that, that they don't have a family that they can love, but there is somebody. There's always at
Mm-hmm.
least one person. And even if you feel like there's not, you have to really think about it, because there's always that one person that's always there, who will always listen to what you have to say, and those are the people that you have to value. And because I've seen it many, many times, when I was working with kids, that they felt like they had nobody, and all it took was for me to say, "I'm here," and then you begin to realize how much of an impact that really has on them. When somebody sits there and tells you, "I'm here," no judgment, no advice, no nothing like that. Just simply showing support and saying, "I'm here for you," goes a long way.
And I think I want to say something too on that. Just because you say you're there doesn't mean they're going to open up to you either.
Yeah,
It
no,
just means that they feel like they're not alone in that moment. And
exactly.
that's very important to distinguish, because just because you go out and you tell the world that you're here for them doesn't mean people are going to open up to you, because you have to build a relationship and trust with someone before they do.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
all that to say, just telling them that you're there for them can help them feel a little bit better in that moment.
Yeah,
Um, it's not going to make them miraculously better, and 9 times out of 10, being around people makes it feel worse, because
yeah,
you feel alone even when you have 10 people around you. Um, and that's just another, like, the a form of anxiety and depression is feeling alone when you're around people. And
yeah,
it's I just wanted to mention that it's important to say that just because you say you're there doesn't mean they're going to open up to you. So
yeah. So essentially, what I'm saying is like, uh, the best way to handle a situation like that, which it actually worked for me, because my mom actually practiced it with me, is that she said she was there for me, but then she waited for me to independently reach out,
yeah,
because somebody that's going through depression or has anxiety has to get to a place where they're ready to connect with somebody or ready to talk to somebody. And for me, that was really hard, because, like I said, throughout my childhood, I really didn't experience too much of a connection. The only connection I really had to my siblings and to my mom. I didn't really have anything else. So it was rather difficult for me to understand that concept. And it took me a while to really step back, to really self reflect, and to really look um, into some professional help to really understand where my struggles were coming from. And that's why I encourage professional help, because they're going to look at your life and look at your issues objectively. So they're going to look at it as almost like a formula, and they're going to try and see what's wrong with the formula and fix it so that you can get to the solutions. So, like for me, I had an issue with separation, so it would cause panic attacks for me. And my therapist broke it down to the whole divorce, and then not having consistent role models to show healthy separation and healthy space. And she also pointed it to the fact that the way that my mom used to soothe me when I was a baby, she didn't allow me to self soothe a little bit. Um, she would consistently do everything in her power to keep me around her. So like that made me a very dependent person. And now becoming an adult, actually an issue, because uh, to be in a healthy relationship, you have to have that healthy space as well. Like when somebody has to do something or whatever the case may be. Um, so that's where the professional help comes in, because if I had never gotten a therapist, I would have never known uh, that was something I needed to work on. I would have never known that that was an issue to begin with, right?
yeah,
So going through all of this, I realized when I came back to Chicago how much uh, a support group is necessary. Because that was like one of the first things that my therapist had talked to me about. Was like as soon as I came in, I told her a little bit about myself. I didn't tell too much because I was still very closed off. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable and to feel really closed off when you go into a therapist at first. I just want to put that out there because I was a wreck. I felt so uncomfortable. I was sweating. I pretty much almost had a panic attack just sitting there because you're talking to a stranger, and
Yeah.
so like you're trying to build a connection and tell people about your most vulnerable parts of your life, and you don't know this person. But there's also that it also later on brought me comfort because it wasn't personal. You can go to somebody, tell them their stuff, and they're not going to sit there and judge you. It's their job to help you heal. So after a while, I found comfort in that, and I just want to let people know like that doesn't come overnight. That comes after multiple sessions, but it's just taking baby steps. And for me, it started off with just telling her that like I felt all I told her like the first time was I felt anxious and I dealt with depression. That's all I pretty much told her. And then little by little, I opened up and told her about my childhood and told her about my relationships and all my experiences thus far. And then that's when she was really able to like pinpoint key moments in my life that have influenced me and has caused trauma. And it's through those little baby steps that I was able to make grand gestured steps toward healing. Um, and the one thing that my therapist kept on telling me and encouraging me was that even if it was a baby step of improvement, it's still improvement. So even if I had like just like 5 minutes of positivity in my day, that's still 5 more minutes that I didn't have in the past.
Yeah.
And as I continue to go through this therapy is when this awareness really came into light, and I um, really started to understand myself. And still to this day, it's still a constant process. Different situations can cause different triggers, and I'm learning what my triggers are still to this day because it's a constant process. It's something that's going to be with me for the rest of my life, but I'm going to be able to cope with it better because I have developed my support system, so I'm not alone. I got professional help, so I have better awareness of myself, and I'm consistently still looking things up to gain better knowledge and better understanding, which is extremely crucial for mental health and for your self improvement.
Well, and that's something that we mentioned in the last episode too, is that like your anxiety is going to change. It might change because you're never going to completely beat it. It's always going to be something that's a part of you.
Yeah.
But it's taking those tools that you learn along the way that you can recognize those markers, figure out what is triggering that, and then through a support system, through lifting, through running, through diet, through whatever helps you kind of cope with that anxiety can help you kind of move past it.
Yeah, exactly. The point that you had made in the previous episode, it's not about necessarily the anxiety, but what you do in those anxious moments that either make it something that becomes a huge issue, like becoming a panic attack or anything like that, or actually being able to catch it in the moment and self-soothe and process it in a healthy manner.
Yeah.
Which was something that I had to learn. So I guess another point that I wanted to share about my experience was that, so that whole relationship that I had mentioned earlier, I actually had gotten married and then I got a divorce. And man, when I tell you that puts so much stress and anxiety on me, I like lost total stability. Everything that I had built up to that time completely came crumbling down when I came back home to Chicago.
Well, and not just that, but you got divorced, separated. So you moved back to Chicago and you were still technically married.
Yeah.
And
So
that added a level of stress to it as well. And I don't know if you were wanting to mention that or not, but I think it's important to note how big of a stressful situation it was.
Yeah. So like essentially, I can put it to you. Let me just paint the picture for you. you're talking about me, a guy who's dealt with separation anxiety, and it's developed since it was a baby. Um, and then all of a sudden getting a divorce. I don't want to necessarily explain the reason why,
Yeah, you're good.
but essentially we end up having to get a divorce. And the minute I find out that we're getting divorced, literally within a week, I'm back home in Chicago, and we're separated. And you're talking a 14-hour drive separation, not just like, oh, I
Yep.
just moved to the next house over, or I just went to my mother's house down like 30 minutes away. You're talking 14 hours, well over 500 miles away.
Yep.
And like that separation is what really, I guess you can say, uh, rebuilt me, because even though it crushed me down and brought me back to the bare minimum, it was like basically like the phoenix. It burned down and then I was reborn, because it made me realize that I really have to get to the root of my issues and really have to grow from this. And when I came back, um, it wasn't instant. It was very much years in the process. I finally realized that I needed my support system, so I had my family, which I was very grateful for. I stepped up and found a therapist and started talking to her, and then I continued and I got back into working out. So like another thing was I didn't even work out when I was in West Virginia, and like
Mm-hmm.
I was going through all that depression and all that anxiety, and I wasn't doing anything that was like self-soothing. So like that was another recipe for disaster. So it goes to show how important it is to really invest in yourself and to really find things that really soothe you, that really brings some happiness to you, that releases endorphins. And when I came back, I was lucky enough to land a job at a gym. Um, One of my friends was working there, and she heard that I had come back home from Chicago and I didn't have a job. And I was so lucky enough to have that support to where I got a job within 3 weeks of moving back home.
Yep.
And I tell you, that was huge for me. I got heavily into working out again. I became a trainer, and like I started surrounding myself with people that had a positive mentality, because the whole environment of the gym is self improvement, right?
Yep.
So it was kind of ironic, I was going through this hard time. I was, feeling unstable, but yet I was pretty much instilling this environment at work, because it was my job. I was telling people, you can do this, you can get through this, and all this stuff. And then little did they know that I was basically talking to myself at the same time. And I ended up falling in love with the gym, and it became such a huge uh, support tool in my life. And like that's something I want everybody to learn from this. Find something that you're passionate about and stick with it, like no matter what. If it's just a hobby, or if it's a job that you like, whatever the case may be, find it and focus on it, because that's where you're gonna feel like you have purpose. That's where you're gonna feel like you can heal, and you're gonna feel proud about something, because you're building value in something and within yourself, because you're gonna be able to prove to yourself that you can do something. And like for me, my fitness journey was that thing for me, because I tracked a whole year. Um, Through my depression, I had dropped about 30 pounds, because I wasn't eating as much, and
Mm-hmm.
all the stress. I'm nearly 6 foot. I'm Doctors, they like to go back and forth. So I range my height between 5'10" to about 5'11" and a half. And I was only 135 pounds. Yeah, I was wearing a size small shirt, and I was wearing for men's clothes. I was wearing a size 29 on the waist. You know, most people don't know, but a size 29 is pretty hard to come by. That's not the normal size that you'll pick up at Walmart.
Yep.
And that's when I realized like I needed to get my shit together. And so through this journey, I went from 135 up to 175, 180, and that was strictly just from eating right and forcing myself to eat, because there were plenty of times where I didn't feel like eating. I was stressed out. I didn't think about eating. But the second I would look at food, I'd force myself to eat because I knew down the line it would be for my betterment. Even if I didn't feel like it, even if I felt like there was no point. The bare minimum reason that I decided to eat was because I had my one goal, and my goal was to get fit,
Yeah.
and that was my motivation. It wasn't, oh, I want to get past depression. It wasn't, oh, I need to get let go of this anxiety. I simplified my goal to just being fit, and that was it
And
for me.
I think that's an important thing too, is to not take on more than what you can handle. So
Yeah,
for a lot of people, setting small goals, either for the day or for the week or for a set period of time to achieve, is very important, because it can help you get that little dopamine of oh, I accomplished something.
yeah,
So like if you have a ton of stuff to do for that month, take one day, do one thing, and that accomplishes that goal. You feel good about the fact that you've accomplished that, and then use that momentum to do that next thing.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
too many people try to take on too many things at once, and it overwhelms them, and then it makes their anxiety worse.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about the baby steps that lead up to the big step.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then now that, and that's the thing, like it was still a hard journey because I was still working a lot, but I still wasn't feeling super stable. But I just pushed myself, and I just kept on staying in the gym, even if I didn't want to, And after, I still have my 1 year transformation picture, and I still look at it still to this day, and it's not like to boast or anything, but just to remind myself, like, I can do anything if I really put my mind to it. And I know that sounds like crazy cliche, but it
No, I
really,
mean it's true.
yeah. And
You can do anything that you want to do. You just have to take steps to do it.
yeah, exactly. And like that just really was like a huge pivotal point for me, because then you think about it, I went from pretty close to, like, losing my life, um, through this whole ordeal, you know, and I guess to really put it into perspective how severe this depression anxiety got to me during this whole time was that I actually ended up in the hospital. And I know you heard about it, Brennan, that I ended up developing a heart condition to where my heart was not pumping at the proper volume. So um, essentially my blood pressure would drop, and I would experience symptoms of a heart attack, like if my heart was going to give up. And that was strictly just from anxiety and depression. And like people don't understand that this can really have a physical effect on your health, and you have
Yeah.
to be mindful of that. This is like, you got to be able to build value within yourself to take care of yourself so that you can make all these goals come true and to live a nice and beautiful life. Um, because it's like, through that whole process, I was in the hospital for like 4 or 5 days. I had to wear a heart monitor on my chest for like 3 months. And what was even more crazy was that I was still going to work, and I'm training these people, and they're sitting there looking at me like I'm crazy because I still got all these wires hooked up to me.
Yeah.
um, but the only way that I got through that was that I told myself that I'm stronger than I even think I am, and I had to prove it to myself. And I didn't think about it. Well, the whole heart situation or anything like that. All I thought about was being a better person, and I wanted to build value within myself and build value within my clients that I was training. So I ended up using my condition as a tool, because when I used to have clients tell me, "Oh, I can't do it, I can't do it," and like I would sit there and do the exercise, and I'd be like, "What's your excuse? I'm wearing a heart monitor right now, so why can't you do it?" And then they would sit there and be like, "Oh, snap!" So
And I think that's a good place to end it, because that's exactly what. So when I created Spero, the Moment Makers tagline didn't come to me until later on.
mhm,
Um, But that's exactly what it means to me, and that's why I kind of latched onto that as the tagline for Spero, and kind of ultimately why I wanted to use it for the podcast, because it's taking what you have, your situation, and making the best that you can with it, making
Yeah,
your moment. And that's what Moment Makers is about. It's about taking your anxiety, your depression, your back pain, your heart condition, your cancer, taking that and using it as a tool to push you to be the best possible version that you can be.
exactly.
So I think that's a good place to end it, to not go too long.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, essentially, even still to this day, like I guess an update is just like it's still a battle, but it's just constantly exposing yourself to support and awareness and building your knowledge. And that's pretty much where I'm at right now. So
Yeah,
it's just and just being real with it. You know that it's still a constant issue, but still
yeah,
believing in yourself that you can get through it.
for sure. And we'll kind of, as we do this, we're still trying to find our rhythm with it of how we want to do it, what we want to do. I know we want to have people on and talk to them, kind of do an interview. Um,
Yeah,
what I'm thinking is doing an interview a week, and then maybe just me and you kind of chatting one a week, and then kind of give an update of where we're at and how we're dealing and what tools we're using at this current moment. That'd be cool for a podcast episode, to tell people exactly what we're doing right now as we're doing the podcast, to deal with any anxiety or anything we're dealing with. So
yeah, and I also want to put in there that if any of you guys have any questions about my experience that you guys have heard so far, or if you feel like you want me to elaborate more on something, you guys can actually go ahead and leave any questions, and we'll be able to get back to you on all those questions as well. Because I really don't mind using my story as a way to help you figure out what's going to work for you. So if you guys have any
yeah,
questions, then by all means leave them, and then we'll be able to get back to you on those.
and we've got all of our Instagram handles, Facebook for the podcast, all of that stuff. They're linked down below in the description. Reach
Yeah,
out to us. Eli's got more of a professional background, so if you have any professional advice that you need, he's the one to ask, because I am not qualified at all for that. So don't ask me. um, but we're here for whatever you guys need, and if you have questions or you have comments or anything, leave them down in the reviews, because we'd like to grow this into something bigger than even what we think it could be, so we can
for
reach
sure.
more people. So leave us a review down below. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of it, and what we could do to make it better. But I think that's a good place to end it. Thanks for sharing your side of it. I think next episode, I'm going to share kind of my experience, and we'll go from there.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that, man. I want to get down to the nitty gritty.
For sure. Awesome, man.
All right, man.
We'll end it there.
All right, awesome. Well, then y'all have a good time, and we'll keep on building this community.
We'll see you guys in the next one.